In that isolated cove, known only to fishermen and a few ancient families who dared to settle there, stood a stone house blackened by continuous weeks of fog and salty rain. When the protagonist, we'll call him Niall, arrived at the age of 22, after losing his mother under strange circumstances, he felt his destiny pulling him to this place. He decided to embrace the isolation to start his podcast about obscure topics, a project that aimed to explore the boundary between the occult and chaos. But what he found there, he could never have imagined. On the first day, Niall brought only his suitcase, an old recorder, flashlights, and several newspaper clippings about old disappearances in the community. Rumors spoke of deformed sea creatures, muffled laughter emerging from the shore when the tide receded, and bodies found floating, their mouths visibly stretched, as if forced inside out by something inhuman. Though skeptical, Niall felt the village held secrets that begged to be uncovered. On the second night, as the cold wind whistled through the window gaps, he recorded the first sounds, a low, almost imperceptible whisper rattling the recorder. The voice spoke in an intonation that mixed anguish and anger, repeating a sequence of ancient dates. Niall held the microphone in front of the door, taking a deep breath, and slowly opened it. Outside, there was only fog and the continuous pounding of waves hammering the wooden pier. He climbed the creaking stairs to the attic, his camera on. In the silence, each step protested like a lament. When he finally reached the top floor, his flashlight illuminated an unexpected object, an old portrait of a young woman, perhaps from the 1940s, with eyes that seemed to follow him, and behind it, stuck firmly to the wall, a clipping of what remained of a newspaper cover with the headline, "Missing," emblazoned in capital letters. The next day, walking along the black stone beach, Niall met Maeve, a local librarian who had lost her father and brother at sea 5 years earlier. She warned him, her voice trembling, that the house was cursed, that ancient pagan ceremonies had been held there for that thing, seeking protection against the ocean's fury. But perhaps the ceremonies instead yielded to its own fury, corrupting the barrier between worlds. She revealed that, since then, at 3 in the morning, there were reports of people being dragged away by the waves, and that at dawn, remains of clothing and body parts were found on the rocks. Niall noted everything in his pad, every detail, made the narrative feel like dreadful headlines about to become reality. On the third night, already armed with courage and equipment, he decided to install cameras on the deserted bridge connecting the village to the isolated rock in the middle of the bay. At 2:47 a.m., the cameras captured a hunched figure climbing. Over the stones, something with long, disproportionate limbs and a coat that swayed as if it were part of the sea, covered in moss and algae. Its steps were soft, pliable. It was just slinking. The recorder in Niall's pocket picked up a sound. Half-click, half-guttural growl, something like "come," and then absolute silence. When he returned the next day, he found only wet. Footprints that ended abruptly, as if the creature had dissolved into the deep waters. The footprints were too large for human feet and had webbed markings, like a waterfowl's feet. Niall spent the following days interviewing locals, and they all had something in common. The fear was palpable, their eyes distant, and they had vivid nightmare sensations. A local nurse, Eileen, who had cared for some of the missing, said that the bodies that arrived had scratch marks made both internally and externally, skin torn, as if some predator had tried to rip the heart out from the inside. She said this, in a hushed, constrained voice, unable to look him in the eye. When he asked for permission to record, she recoiled in fear. "Record what you want, but please don't touch these files." Niall understood he was about to cross a boundary that not everyone in the village wanted to breach. By then, the recorder captured strange voices inside the stone house. When he returned to the attic, he found the woman's portrait stolen from the frame. Only the face remained, shattered, as if something had passed through there. The newspaper clipping was torn, and a new line of text was handwritten in black ink. "Bring me the heart." It was then he realized he had become a target, and that the creature inhabiting the bay, or some kind of tidal spirit, demanded sacrifice. His pulse raced, his skin tingled. This was the conclusion of the first segment, when Niall realized he could no longer run. The morning after the discovery in the attic, Niall woke up to dried blood on the front door handle. He didn't remember touching it during the night. The security camera installed there had been destroyed, as if something had ripped it out with claws or fangs. With trembling hands, he wiped the blood and decided to search the village's old archives, hidden in an old Anglican church converted into a document storage. There, he found the diary of a priest who disappeared in the 1960s. His notes spoke of a marine cult that inhabited the depths, known as the Black Mouth Clearing. These followers performed offering rituals to the creatures living in the deep reef in exchange for abundance and longevity. But everything had a price. The members began to sicken, their bodies became disfigured, and their eyes turned completely black. As he read the accounts, a page came loose and fell at his feet. It was a rudimentary drawing of an underground staircase built beneath the stone house, one that led directly to the heart of the cliff. Niall immediately returned to investigate. Inside the trapdoor beneath the basement rug, there was a path of corroded moss-covered steps spiraling down. As he descended, he was overwhelmed by a smell of salt, rust, and burnt flesh. Downstairs, a room with symbols carved into stone, crudely painted in dried blood. In the center, a human skeleton lay with its hands sewn to its chest. But what paralyzed him was the sound of something dragging itself behind him. When he turned, his flashlight flickered and illuminated, for fractions of a second, the silhouette of a woman in a white veil floating. Without legs, without a face, she raised her arms and the light went out. He woke up the next morning on the ground floor, lying on a circle of salt. His own fingers were cut, as if he had violently scratched stones. The camera in the basement hadn't recorded anything, except for 22 seconds of static, followed by the sound of increasingly stronger heartbeats, until they ceased with a final crash, like the sound of a giant stone falling into the water. From then on, everything changed. In the village, children began to disappear. First was Ailish, 9 years old, who was playing alone on the cliff path. Her dog returned covered in algae, barking hysterically. Then it was a boy named Ronan, 17, who worked as a boat repairman. They found his boat empty, surrounded by claw marks all over the hull. Local authorities tried to hush up the cases, blaming high tides and treacherous winds. But Niall knew. The creature had awakened, and now it wanted more. Maeve appeared at his door, breathless, holding a book wrapped in leather, stitched like skin. She said she had found it hidden behind the library shelves, a grimoire of marine rituals written in archaic Latin and unknown runes. The last pages spoke of a containment ritual. A voluntary sacrifice had to be made, where the offerer submerged into the bay's rift, carrying the stone heart, a black rock studded with symbols, which would seal the creature in the depths again. But there was an important detail. The offerer could not die as a human. He must be transformed, the last line read. Maeve believed that Niall was already changing. He hadn't eaten for days. Dark spots were beginning to appear on his skin. His eyes burned in the sun, and his mind was invaded by maritime visions. Images of submerged temples, of creatures in worship, of claws rising from the bottom of the world. Niall decided to act. At 3 a.m, he went to the cliff with the black rock in his hands, facing the rain that cut like razors. But before he could throw himself in, he saw something emerge. A body, humanoid, covered in algae, with grayish-white skin, and empty eyes. It was Ailish, or what was left of her. Her jaw had been grotesquely elongated, as if she were eternally screaming. She stretched out her arms and pointed to the sea. More creatures appeared behind her, all victims, all altered. Niall fell to his knees. He realized he couldn't just seal it. The thing was already loose. The recorder captured his last message that night. If you are listening to this, run. Don't stay near the coast. They are not tied to the water. They have evolved. They want more. Niall's body was never found, but the complete audio was automatically sent to his channel, programmed to be published if he didn't return in 2 days. If you've made it this far, maybe you are still safe. But if you felt a chill, if something behind you looks different now, then the change has already begun. Before it progresses, Subscribe to the channel. Perhaps here among us, you will find protection in the words and stories we tell. Now tell me, have you ever seen something in the sea that you can't explain? Have you ever felt like you were being watched while looking at the horizon? Comment below, but be careful what you share. Some stories may want to tell themselves. Weeks passed since Niall's disappearance. The village fell silent, as if all natural sounds had been swallowed. The seagulls vanished. The wind no longer howled across the slopes. Only the sound of the waves, increasingly deep, like a giant breath approaching the coast, marked the starless nights. Maeve stayed. She settled in the house where everything began, perhaps hoping to understand, perhaps waiting for the end. In the basement, she found what Niall never saw. Beneath the boards of the east wall, there was a secret niche, where someone had sealed a stone mask with embedded human teeth. On the back, in scarlet ink, it read, "He who sees becomes." The weight of those words made no sense, until the day Maeve stared into the living room mirror and saw a reflection that didn't match her face. It was her, but with pupils less eyes, a mouth full of sand, and hair moving as if floating in water. She fainted. She was taken to Ballycroy Hospital, an old and almost forgotten clinical center, where doctors claimed post-traumatic stress. But a nurse, named Annika, discreetly approached her during the night. She had tired eyes and circular scars on her wrists. "You saw, didn't you?" she whispered. "You were marked. They will come for you before the full moon. And they will use your skin as a veil." Maeve fled that same night. Searching the medical records, she discovered that Annika had been declared dead 3 years earlier, after disappearing in a boating accident. Her body was never found. And most disturbing, several psychiatric patients in the region had reported maritime hallucinations, sounds of drums during low tides, and dreams where they floated in stone temples, surrounded by beings with eyes that never blinked. She then decided to seek the last survivor of an extinct cult mentioned in the missing priest's diary, a man named Uldric, who lived isolated in the far reaches of Iceland near the cold coast of Vik Myrdal. Maeve traveled there, her sanity hanging by a thread. When she found him, she saw a deformed elder, with skin resembling wet leather, breathing with difficulty through holes behind his ears. He did not greet her with words, but with a gesture. He pointed to the sea. That night, he told her, he said the original cult did not worship gods. They worshipped living remnants of the world before humanity, creatures that, according to him, lived in the depths before time, before light, and that humans only awakened through ignorance. They don't feel pain, they don't feel hunger in the way we know it. They feed on consciousness, invade dreams, dominate memories, until the body no longer belongs to the person. Uldric was the last to escape the awakening of Aegir, an event that destroyed an entire village on the north coast of Greenland when fishermen found a black egg and decided to study it. He himself was contaminated, but he controlled the mutation with constant pain, piercing himself every night to maintain what was still human. Before he died, he gave Maeve a map and a warning. If you try to end them, they will spread. There is no victory, only warning others remains. Upon returning to Ireland, she found the village empty. The houses were open, food still on the plates, but no bodies except one. In the center of the square, a statue had been erected. It wasn't there before. It seemed made of volcanic stone, but it was warm to the touch. It was Niall, or what was left of him. His body was completely black, like polished coal, with spiral inscriptions running up his legs to his chest. On his chest, the black rock he should have used to seal the rift was melted, fused to the bone. Below the statue, a note. You stopped him, but now he has awakened. And you, who have listened this far, maybe you feel the ground vibrate. Maybe you perceive a subtle sound in your ears. Maybe, just maybe, you have also been marked. The note was still burning in her hands when Maeve felt something strange on her skin, an unsettling tingling that spread rapidly. It wasn't a common physical symptom. It was an invisible mark, a warning of what was to come. As night fell, the village, though empty, seemed to come alive in a macabre way. Shadows crawled on the walls, whispers echoed through the alleys, and a thick fog began to rise from the sea, enveloping everything in a cold, oppressive blanket. Maeve realized she wasn't alone. Figures began to emerge from the mist, skeletal shadows covered in algae and mollusk shells, their eyes glowing with a dull, cold light. They were those who had been consumed, not bodies, but prisons of trapped consciousnesses waiting to be freed or destroyed. In her mind, voices began to speak, disconnected phrases that became increasingly clear. You shouldn't have come back. The veil has been torn. They seek the blood of the last one. Maeve ran to the old lighthouse at the end of the peninsula, a place abandoned for decades that seemed the only possible refuge. Inside, she found a box with ancient artifacts, crystals, black shells, and an amulet made of intertwined bones, which glowed with a faint, bluish light. As she tried to understand the amulet's meaning, a deafening noise made the lighthouse tremble. The door was ripped from its hinges by an invisible force. She felt the cold, dense air fill the room. The salty, putrid smell of water mixed with an odor of burned flesh. When the fog invaded the lighthouse, Maeve closed her eyes, waiting for the worst. But then, a distinct voice, almost a familiar whisper, spoke. You are not alone, Maeve. She opened her eyes and saw a woman emerge from the mist, with gray eyes and skin like cracked porcelain. It was Annika, but not the nurse she had known, but something beyond, an entity that oscillated between the human and the spectral. They want you to give up, to accept the darkness, but I learned to resist. Maybe together we can... Before she could finish, the creature advanced, its hands transforming into twisted claws. Maeve fought, feeling the amulet heat up fiercely in her hand, emitting a light that seemed to burn the fog. She managed to close the door and seal the lighthouse with the amulet. The silence returned abruptly. The air became light. But inside her, something had changed. At dawn, Maeve walked out into the streets. The village was empty, but different. The shadows had disappeared, and a strange silence of hope hung in the air. However, she knew that this relief would be temporary. Evil was dormant, but never dead. And now, it was behind her, in her dreams, in her steps, waiting for the right moment to awaken again. If this story made you feel the weight of fear and the tension of the fight against the unknown, share with me what most gave you chills in this account. Which character do you think acted with the most courage? And if it were you, could you face the darkness that inhabits the village? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue being part of this community where mysteries, chilling accounts, and supernatural experiences are respected and debated. Here, every story has its place, and you can also share yours. Tell us about your experiences, your doubts, or even that sinister story you've kept hidden. Together, let's create a space where fear transforms into connection. Thank you for staying until the end. I hope you felt every breath, every shadow, every moment of tension. Until the next story, where terror and mystery will meet again.